Hi, I'm Dr. Sylvia Peregrino, and this is Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Today, I'm honored to have Veronica Carbajal, who is running for mayor of the city of El Paso. Elections are in November, and Ms. Carbajal, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come to our show. Welcome, Ms. Carbajal.
Thank you, Dr. Peregrino. It's an honor to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a fourth generation commuter. My great-grandfather, my grandpa, my mom, and myself commuted from Juarez to El Paso. I went to public school in El Paso. My mom worked as a low-wage worker at garment factories and school cafeterias. And I graduated from Bridges High School in 1994. And then I went on to Brown University. I studied environmental studies. And back then it was extremely depressing because we really weren't sure we were going to make it to 2020 because climate change was becoming alarmingly clear as a problem. I came home and did air pollution work for a couple of years, and then I went to law school at UT Austin. I started working at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid in 2004. So I just celebrated my 16th year at Legal Aid. I am a community lawyer. I provide free legal services to people who are poor, and my practice areas have included environmental justice, housing, both for tenants and homeowners, disaster assistance, civil rights cases, and a number of other issues.
Why are you running for mayor?
I never thought I would enter politics, and people had asked me for a number of years to run for mayor or for something else. And I always responded with, I love being in the trenches. I love helping people. And at Legal Aid, the three things that have kept me there are my cases, my clients, and my coworkers. I work with very passionate people, and our clients are incredibly wonderful, earnest folks. And so it really took a lot for me to think about running. And because of the cases that I've done, I've had, I think, a very different perspective on what the city is doing right and what it's not doing right. My clients live the consequences of city council's decisions, whether it's increasing the taxes or choosing, to put a lot of money into downtown development, whether it's the sports arena in Duranguito, how it responds to disaster assistance. I've had a pretty long history of dealing with the city. And it was just time. I reached a point where I realized that we need leadership that is hardworking and fearless, people who are willing to question our city manager and our city attorney, and are willing to think about everyday El Pasoans with every decision that they make, especially when it comes to the budget and how we allocate resources. If I thought any of the other candidates could do as well of a job as I can do, I wouldn't be in the race. Because again, politics was never my dream. It's a thing that I'm doing out of necessity for a community that I love.
If elected, you would be making history. We've only had one female mayor. We've had a couple of Latino mayors, but we've never had a Latina be mayor. Thinking about this, why is this important?
Representation is important, right? I mean, in terms of opportunities, all of our elected positions should be open to women, to people of different backgrounds and who belong to different communities, including LGBTQ, people with disabilities. And when it comes to this potential history making, it would be historic for El Paso, but it would be historic for the United States. I would be the first Latina mayor of a city in the top 20 in terms of size in our country. And the mayor of Tucson made history by being in the top 25. But El Paso, even though we think of El Paso as being small, we're actually ranked 19th in the country in terms of size. So I would love to make history along with everyone, here. But more than that, and I say this as someone who is proudly Chicana, proudly Mexican-American, proudly Latinx, more than that, I want people to look at the work that I've done on behalf of our community, on behalf of our primarily Latinx community. I think as a voter, I have also questioned people who, you know, maybe Latinx or maybe Black or maybe belong to other communities, but they're not necessarily representing my community in the way that I would want them to. And so I think that gender identity and identity politics are extremely important, and we again need diversity. However, that's not enough. If I'm going to vote, I want to vote for someone who's actually going to take the concerns of everyday El Pasoans seriously and has the experience to ask the right questions and push for the right answers.
What are your top 3 priorities?
That is very tough. It's very tough. Economic development is the first one. And I think that, I mean, it's really the one, right? Economic development. The way I think of economic development, however, is that we need to be mindful of our decisions. We cannot continue to sacrifice our environment or destroy our history or displace our most vulnerable homeowners and tenants. We need to think about economic development in terms of, you know, our very unique position. Of course, we're binational, and that's extremely important. But we need to think about it also in light of COVID. COVID has taught us a lot of lessons about what is essential and what is not, and what kinds of jobs are considered essential and which ones are not, and how do we how do we think about economic development, including a very strong resiliency plan? And for me, it goes back to our budget has to protect people. It has to represent, you know, everyday needs. You know, your streets and your lighting, your parks, your public spaces, your public health. You know, that is, we know it's extremely important to have that as a priority. And then we have these other things that we cannot sacrifice, whether or not we're in the midst of a pandemic. And so that means that our budget has to allow for emergency funding, which we were not able to do this time around. We had to wait for the CARES Act to kick in. And even when it did, I am still concerned that our city has not allocated enough money for the things that are essential right now. And again, this goes back to the city attorney's office. It goes back to the city manager. Have they not done their homework? Why are we not distributing more of the $119 million that our city was allocated through the CARES Act funding?
So if you were mayor, what would you be doing different now that we're in this COVID-19 crisis?
You know, Dr. Pellegrino, at the end of March, I put together a video just for the campaign because we were all sort of staying at home and trying to figure out what to do. And in the video, this was end of March, right? And I'm not an elected official, but I've had a lot of experience with disasters with both the MOAD, the MOAD community, but just the floods that we had in El Paso in 2006, the Harvey hurricane, helping people with that a little bit from here, helping with the economic disaster that we had in 2008 and 9, and then the mass shooting. There are things that you can expect will happen, right? The pandemic is extremely different because on top of the economic impact, we are talking about a highly contagious disease. However, we were not the first city to deal with that. We were 4 months, we followed about 4 months of this pandemic throughout the rest of the world, and we had models to look at from other communities that were tackling the disease in a way that was fair and was urgent and effective. And if I had been in charge in March, I would have focused first and foremost on keeping people healthy and safe in their homes, and also keeping them financially secure, because those two things are extremely correlated, right? However, if you're a millionaire and if you're not concerned about receiving money on a day-to-day basis, you're not necessarily thinking that people are going to try to go to work or try to, have to worry about where to take their children for daycare if you are not concerned about those things, if you have steady income. So if I had been in charge in the beginning, my number one focus would have been our public health department. Our department was had a funding cut in 2018 of $2 million. We have not had an acting public health department director since April. He took a month off in April and then resigned in May. We don't have enough epidemiologists. When you look at countries like South Korea, they focused immediately on the public health, which for them included primarily testing and contact tracing. Why? You know, because you need to know this is a highly contagious disease. That was not a mystery. And so that community was able to avoid having to shut down completely because they've been so aggressive about that. And we could debate whether what they've done is right or not, but there are things that we should have done better. One, focus on public health. And how that played out in El Paso is that, I'll give you my example. I stayed home for about 2 weeks straight, didn't have contact with folks outside of my home. When I went outside, I envisioned a ghost town. Okay, I thought no one would be out in the stores. I had to go grocery shopping, and I thought there will be no traffic. Everyone's staying home. Everyone is being guarded, and that wasn't the case. We never shut down. I have family who work at big box stores, and they said, yeah, people are coming and hanging out. No one's wearing masks, no one's wearing gloves, no one's using the sanitizer, and they're just hanging out. So I think, again, focusing on enforcement. We should have enforced these rules for the benefit of people. We furloughed over close to 400 city employees. I think if they had been equipped appropriately with protective equipment, they could have done some of that enforcement, right? And I'm not talking about taking people to jail, because the jails have been hotspots. I'm talking about giving people citations. And more than that, communicating to people how serious this issue was. Because if you're still allowing people to go to Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's, and they think it's normal that everyone is hanging out there, then you're not getting the message across. So clear communication was vital, and we didn't have it for a very long time. We didn't have it in English or Spanish or even American Sign Language, which was a huge issue for some people. How you communicate is vital in a situation like this, and we didn't have consistency, and we didn't have clarity in the messaging. We have Amber Alerts. Those were not used, in my opinion, effectively, because they could have been bilingual and had very strict instructions for people besides washing your hands, because that is only one tiny component. The bigger component is staying home, or if you leave, wearing the mask. In terms of the financial assistance, I have been lucky enough to be able to work on this issue as part of my work at Legal Aid. And so I've had the opportunity to craft the agreements that are going to be used with landlords and tenants, which has also been great. But it's also, it also shows us that you really need to have people at every level of government who understand very basic things like how evictions work, how foreclosures work, where people are going to be needing legal assistance as well as financial assistance. And understanding that, I think, would have been, again, important in helping people calm down and realize, you know, it's okay if you can't go to work, because we're going to be able to help you through some of this. With the furloughed employees, there are so many things that we could have had them do. They could have helped people apply for unemployment, apply for the small business loans, apply for, now it's happening, the rental assistance program, right? And we would have kept those jobs. And city jobs are very important, because the city employment, or the workforce, is one of the few in El Paso that has access to a union. They have access to healthcare. They have access to benefits. And so I understand that they're not all paid very well, but they are in some ways pretty solid jobs, unless you have a situation like this where they're clearly not prioritized and they're just cut loose and left to fend for themselves once their unemployment runs out.
What would you do in the future if elected mayor? What would you do about those furloughed employees?
I would go back to the budget and see what we can cut so that we can bring them back. They're vitally important. Their families are a part of this community's economy. And so we know that the unemployment benefits are going to run out, and we owe it to them to bring back as many as we can, and to figure out how to do it in a way that is safe so that we're not exposing them to COVID. But again, if we had tackled this differently, I believe that we could have used the city employees to do the things that we needed to get done, including the testing, the communications, enforcement, the contact tracing. But if we didn't have anyone at the helm, right, you need a very strong public health department to be able to direct those needs and to say, this is what needs to be communicated. When, again, I've limited my access to stores, but in the beginning, and even after we had the, I mean, it's all gone back and forth, right? But when we were told you have to wear a mask if you enter a public space, I walked into stores where the cashier was the only employee there. They could not enforce, someone who walked in without a mask. They couldn't do that. And so that's where the city should have stepped in and said, well, we have people who we furloughed, let's call them back. But the city saw it as a money saving, opportunity. And so they really got rid of these employees without thinking about how they could have been utilized to help us combat COVID. Because then you have a win-win. You have them on the payroll, but they're also helping you get this thing taken care of so that you can reopen fully. And you're not doing this back and forth on reopenings.
Texas is facing a resurgence. I guess the wave never went down. So we just keep climbing and climbing. And so I think you make a lot of good points. I didn't realize that the city had cut that much from public health. And I knew that we didn't have anybody in charge, but I guess they're not making any plans to fill that position.
No, most recently this week, which is this week started off with July 6th, city council representatives said, we'd want to staff that position, and they were informed that the position has not been, there's no search for a public health director. This is not a priority for the city manager. And going back to the $119 million that we got, also it's a plug for the census, because we got that money just based on our numbers, our census numbers, okay? The federal government gave us that money. That's a lot of money that could be used for these incredible things like paying people's rent, paying people's mortgages, and doing more contact tracing, doing the testing itself, having more sites. Just last week on KVIA Extra, there was an issue with the deputy city manager, Tracy Jerome, being very defensive about the fact that their phone line was not picking up. They had six to nine people staffing a hotline that hundreds of thousands of people are trying to access. And so, having been a community lawyer, and we don't have a lot of resources, but we have to do a lot with a little. And it's trained me to think about these things in a way that's very linear. And like we were talking about with the applications, we know with FEMA, with the disasters, with the one fund after the shooting, people need to be walked through, especially right now. They're stressed out. They don't know where to find documents, especially if you don't have a computer or internet access. It's very challenging to do all of those things. And you need someone to walk you through it. And librarians, for instance, have been used in other cities to do just that. Because when you help someone in El Paso access their unemployment benefits, El Paso benefits, right? They're gonna use their money here. They're gonna pay their rent, their mortgage. But so often our communities, and I mean communities that are low income and primarily of color, leave so much money on the table because they don't know how to apply for it. Well, I talked to someone interviewed me over the phone some time back, and they didn't realize that I was, they called about something else. And I said, oh, I'm running, for office. And they said, oh my God, how are you surviving? And it's challenging. I mean, when we think about campaigning, you're doing events in person, and you are door knocking, and you're trying to fundraise, and all of those things require you to have face-to-face contact with people. but in our plan, because we're not part of the primary, was to really start talking to a lot of people after the primary, so people would not be confused, because there's so many candidates and there's so much literature and things that was our plan, and then COVID hit and we couldn't do that. So we've had to do what everyone else is doing, which is to host roundtables, online, and to talk to people long distance, set up Zoom meetings, and we're doing other things too behind the scenes to get the word out. But I want to say that it's, in many ways, I'm grateful that this, not that it happened, it's a terrible thing, but I am hopeful that it's giving all of us an opportunity to think about how elected officials' decisions impact our lives. Sometimes we're so busy that we don't realize that our health is in someone else's hands, that whether our library is opening or closing, that's in someone else's hands. We don't make the connection. And I think that's been the biggest challenge for me when I've been campaigning for other people, because I have been involved in other campaigns, and like I said, I like to vote, and so I get informed, and trying to convince even my family to vote. You have to break it down. What does this particular elected position mean to your life? What kind of power does that person have over the kind of air that you're breathing, how high your taxes are, whether we're investing in the trolley or in public transit in general? That kind of connection sometimes disappears for people. And so I hope that the pandemic is making the connection more clear for people, and they can see the direct impact that the mayor and the city council and the county commissioners' decisions are having over their everyday lives.
And I think I've seen that with my students, that it's the first time that they see the governor on TV, or our county judge, or the mayor, and sometimes they haven't been the best examples, right? Because of what they're doing, or not modeling good behavior for the community. And so you're one of 4 candidates, the only Latina, and 2 of the other candidates, whose names we won't mention, but I'll try to get them for interviews anyway at some point, are millionaires. Do you think that makes a difference?
I think it definitely makes a difference. It makes a difference for someone like me. I'm not a millionaire. I have a great job. I'm very, very blessed to have a job, and I've had a job through the pandemic, which is also a blessing. But I think it makes a difference for a number of reasons. And I could be off. Maybe they have a different perspective. But for me, it's, I know what it's like to struggle. Years ago, when I first started my career and I moved back home and I bought a house, the market crashed the year after I bought my house. And then we had layoffs at work, and we had a pay freeze. I know what it's like to struggle and to try to figure out what is a priority in your life and what isn't, and the anxiety that brings. Because of the work that I've done, I also know what it's like to help people who don't have a safety net. So that's my perspective. Whenever something like this happens, I think of, what are my clients going to do, because they don't have savings. So I think that's really important. I think in terms of the campaign, I don't have millionaire friends. Most of my friends are people who are, working class or on fixed income, or they're middle class, and they've got good jobs, but they don't have a lot of money to give to a campaign. And I think that's okay. I mean, honestly, yes, the campaign needs money, but I think it's okay. I think that sometimes the amount of money that's raised for political campaigns is absurd. And when you think about, how, especially right now, what $500 does to a family, what $5,000 will do to help a community or a nonprofit that's helping other people right now, that's a lot of money. And to me, sometimes it's even grotesque to think about some of these races that have hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where's that money gonna go? Is it gonna go to feed people, to keep them housed, to educate them? No, it's gonna go to elect someone. And so I do believe that we need to think about campaign reform. And I always believe in the power of people. If, of course, you have to account for voter suppression, but if you don't have any of that happening, and God willing, we don't have any of that happening, people's vote is extremely powerful. And I always want people to think that even if you can't give to the campaign, that's okay, because what matters is what you do at the ballot. That's really what matters, that you go and that you vote and that you're able to help elect people that are really going to do right by the community.
And that's usually what I tell my students in class, that in the ballot box, you're equal to a millionaire. If they only get one vote, you only get one vote. Here in Texas, you know, we have, sky's the limit. You can spend a limited amounts of money. But I think there's some examples out of other communities where turnout, has helped the candidates win. And so we wish you luck in your campaign. And I also, that could be a pitch now, depending on when this airs. Early voting is going on till Friday, and then election day for the runoff is on the 14th of July, 2020. And so, in case people are watching, they might still have the opportunity to vote. If not, definitely voting in November, right? And so we've touched upon a lot of topics, and because of COVID, I think that's become the focus. But coming up on August 3rd, we're going to be hitting the 1-year anniversary of the Walmart shooting, which was the deadliest attack on Latinos in the U.S. And so I'm wondering, what would you do as mayor to keep our community from experiencing another tragedy? What do you think?
That's a very tough question, right? Because mass shootings, we have agencies that I think do. We don't know, right? Because they're so good at their job that are able to track social media and posts and things like that to really prevent these shootings from happening, right? If there's a warning or if someone has threatened to do something. That's not always the case. I think that in this particular case with the mass shooting, we know that it was motivated by racial hatred. And I think that there is so much that we can do locally and statewide to combat racism. And I think because of the Black Lives Movement and the death of George Floyd most recently, we've had to really think about that conversation and what it looks like. And in El Paso, our school districts in our city have said we're going to rename certain streets, certain schools, because we are no longer going to pay tribute to people who we know were white supremacists. And I think that's an incredible step. I hope that my administration can really pay justice and tribute to our people of color, our heroes in our history in El Paso. And it's important to do it because that's also how we combat mass shootings that are driven by ignorance and white supremacy. To me, we have so many examples in El Paso of systemic racism, both historic and current, right? The fact that Segundo Barrio and Duranguito, the Lincoln Center, and or the Lincoln area and Chamizal are not historic districts designated by the city, right? They're not protected. That says to me that our city does not value our Chicano and Mexican-American history. That is wrong. You can say 1,000 times we're in a binational tri-state area. It doesn't matter if you're also saying let's bulldoze that history because it's worthless. That is systemic racism. That feeds into someone saying Mexicans are of no value and have done nothing for this community. So we need to combat racism in ways that are very tangible, prioritizing people and history over profit. When we look at, for instance, the Chamizal, we've had a lot of cases in the Chamizal. The most recent that was filed deals with the fact that children in Douglas, Bell, Zavala, and Burleson were not given the same types of resources that other students in El Paso were given, right? That this community is now facing school closures, and children are going to be in cramped, even more cramped school classrooms because of this disparity in funding. That is also, even though we're in a majority minority community, it's when we look at that community in particular, you know, El Paso is 83% Latino, Latinx. The Chamizal is 99% Latinx, primarily immigrant, primarily low income. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to start combating. Not everything will be in my jurisdiction. And also as mayor, you know, I will rely on the city council to do the right thing. But even when there are situations where if it's not in your jurisdiction, you still have a voice, and you can still say to the school district, this isn't right. These are our children, right? They're inside the city. You need to do a better job of allocating your resources in a way that is fair, in a way that is just, and that doesn't display any kind of racism and disparity in treatment. And so I think there's a lot to be done in how we prevent the mentality that feeds white supremacy. And when it comes to how we address mass shootings, it's a very difficult conversation to have right now, right? There are a lot of people in our community that are asking to defund and abolish the police. There are others who are staunchly defending the way that we fund, and the city just said at their budget meeting, despite the crisis, we're going to continue to fund the police and actually increment the amount of money that they get for their academy. And we're going to add, I think the number was 300 additional police officers in the next 10 years. And so these are very different conversations that are being had. And then we think about incidents like the mass shooting, and you think about, like, what is the solution, right? Is the solution having a very quick response time so that there are less victims at a mass shooting? Is the response, do we then start to advocate for gun control and gun safety? There are so many things that feed into these sort of situations, and so it's a difficult one to answer for sure.
Okay, and I think we're coming upon nearing the end of time, and so I wanted to thank you for being a guest, and perhaps we can continue the conversation. But I don't know if you have any closing thoughts that we haven't covered.
I think, my gosh, I think I'm encouraged by this younger generation. I know that the pandemic has been extremely challenging for people. You know, people have gone without graduations, without visiting their loved ones, without even being able to be with them when they've passed away. And so despite all of that, when we look at the activity among young people, right, that they are researching, they are standing up for all kinds of issues, climate change, police brutality, you know, disparity of all sorts, I think that gives me a lot of hope, because I know my generation didn't have that. And so I love that we are, I think, at a precipice, and we are going to be seeing some changes, and that most of us do not want to go back to normal after the pandemic. Most of us want to go back to a world that is transformed into something better and more equal for everyone. And this time, I think, because we have been, you know, in front of our computers and in front of our TVs a lot more, hopefully we're more aware of the causes, not just of the pandemic, but of these other underlying issues, and that more and more people are saying we need to prioritize people over profit, people over these nonsensical policies, and we need to really think about how we're going to use our collective resources to take care of each other. So I hope that translates to people wanting to vote, because again, we're seeing the failure of leadership at every level, resulting in consequences that, you know, we're going to be trying to undo for years, if not decades.
And that's all the time we have. Thank you, Ms. Carbajal, for being with us, and we wish you luck in the November election. And hopefully this gave our viewers an opportunity to get to know you a little better.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.